now we're going to Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
How did you get there?
Got trained to the West Coast and got on a Navy transport. I think probably a DC forward. I don't remember exactly. For some reason that's gone from my memory. And flew to Hawaii.
Yeah. So you didn't go with your planes? I mean, they didn't give you a plane stateside or anything like that?
I was not in the squadron. I was just an individual pilot in the Navy. But a night fighter, I actually did belong sort of loosely to what we call a night fighter unit, which was 7 pilots and a couple of ground personnel. And we were all that time doing night fighter training. We thought we were going to be in a night fighter operation of some kind. But it turned out that the night fighter thing had been developing pretty strongly, and they had decided a different course. They had designated one of the carriers, one of the large carriers, the Bonhomme Richard, was designated as a night carrier, and it was attached to Task Force 58 and 4 other large carriers. So the Yorktown, which I ended up on, was there, and the Bonhomme Richard was in the same group, and it was all night fighter operation. And the theory was that they would get the serious night operations, and these night fighter units of 7 people were attached, they called it, to a day fighter squadron. And so we went aboard the Yorktown when we finally went into combat as a night fighter unit attached to a day fighter squadron, which was VF-88 for me. And as it turned out, Malcolm Campbell, my instructor at Melbourne, was the squadron commander. Not originally, but by the end of the war he was. But I'd better not get into that till I get there.
Yeah.
How that happened. But anyhow, I went to Barbers Point and started more just what they call operational training, more GCI work, and a lot of we did there. We did actually landings. Barbers Point runway was 1,000 feet wide and 4,000 feet long.
Wow.
And you made, they had the runway marked off laterally in 250 quarters, 250 feet each quarter, and they landed 4 airplanes at a time. All the time. They didn't try to get them together. They just landed whoever was there, and there was always somebody on one of those runways. And the center 250 feet had to roll out to the end and go to your squadron office would be on that side, and the next one over here would be on parallel, and on this side be short, to the middle of the runway, and the other 2 on this side separated the same way, so they could operate on the one runway. They could operate 4 different landings and takeoffs all the time. Pretty good arrangement. But it was also wide enough so that we did GCA intercepts and everything in the air there, but also when it came in, we actually started flying weather there a whole lot. We flew whenever the weather, no matter what the weather was. And a lot of times we had landed, we always landed on GCA, and they'd vector you into, they'd ask you which squadron you're in, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you'd be vectored to that particular strip of the width of the runway. And the first time you looked out of the cockpit would be when you felt the wheels touch. They would vector you in the approach and slow you down, control your speed and your distance and altitude. Just down, you'd get down and you're getting close. They're saying 100 feet and 50 feet and 20 feet, that sort of thing. And pretty soon he'd say touchdown, and you knew if you pull your throttle right then, by the time your throttle got back, the wheels would touch. That's how close they were all the time. I came to love the GCA approach because it worked so well, and after the war, got into a lot of arguments with the FAA and other people that were all the airline pilots at that time, were during the war and after were espousing the ILS system, which was brand new at that time, but we were doing the GCAs, and it worked a lot better to me. But the airline pilots liked the ILSs because they were in charge on the ILS, reading their own instruments and doing their own thing. On GCA, you just put yourself in the guy on the ground's hands, and he told you what to do exactly. And I think that was a lot better.
Is that the way it worked on the carrier? Did the carrier do that GCA type approach?
No. Once in combat, one time, my friend Ted and I got the head rubbing, I guess you'd say, and we developed a plan for having a GCA approach to the carrier and being able to land out of that approach. And we flew it in between combat times. We flew it several times and proved it out, and used our radar set that we had at that time. Screen was round like that. We made some celluloid overlays for it and marked the path on there and wrote all that up and sent it to Washington. We thought maybe it'd be a good thing. We thought it was a good thing, but never did hear from it. I don't know, after the war was gone, it was gone somewhere. Never heard of it. don't think they're, well, by after the war, really the what's it called, the light ball system of landing today probably came in so quickly, didn't need the GCA then. Light balls even better. So it took over then. But anyhow, we were at Barbers Point doing all that and having a good time. And I was trying to think of some of the things that happened there.
Well, you told me already, Will, about the flying, almost hitting the
wire.
The wire.
Yeah, that was
that
from
part.
Barbers Point. That was over on the other side of the hills of Canio Bay. And that was one thing that happened there. Another thing that happened as I first started flying there, I was way out east of the Big Island, Hawaii. We were on Oahu at Barbers Point, but Hawaii was the Big Island where the volcano is. And I was way out east of that, coming back in, and saw a Martin B-26 headed the same way. We were going together, and I said, "Where was this?" So I went over there and flew up alongside, and it was a female pilot. Didn't have a helmet on it, and had hair all over, and she waved, I waved, and she was headed for the island. The volcano's there, and it's pretty big slope of a coastline, and pretty rugged, and then it gets just a little bit and started up that volcano steep there, and there were many what I call crevices or canyons or cracks in the approach up the coast, and that gal in that B-26 headed right to one of those cracks and went right in, and it wasn't, I guess it was a couple hundred feet high at the top there and maybe 100 feet deep. She went right down in between the walls, and the land went up and the canyon went down, and she kept getting deeper in there, and I go, by that time I was right behind her. I was going to stay there and see where she went. And she started going, the canyon was going back and forth like this, and she'd go around those corners, that B-26, and I thought, at the beginning, my thought was she couldn't nearly do what I could with the F-6, but she was beginning to stretch me a little bit, and one of these corners, she went around that corner, and I came around and she was gone. I never did see her.
Wow.
And I thought, where'd she go? I looked around and flew up and down, got up high and got out of the canyon and looked down in there, and there was no wreck or anything, and I never did see her come out. I don't know where she went. Somehow she pulled up and got out there before I saw her. But it scared me. She was pulling me tight around some of those corners. She was obviously a ferry pilot.
She was probably trying to see if she could shake you or not.
Yeah, she couldn't shake me, but she got out of there before I did. Let's see. Oh, also in there, I went down in the volcano one time, which is a stupid thing. I'd seen it, and I just thought about it, looked down that big hole down there. And so I got one day and I slowed down.
Now, would this be Diamond Head?
Yeah.
Okay.
And no, it's not Diamond Head. Diamond Head's on Hawaii.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. We're on the wrong island.
This is the big volcano there. I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
Sorry.
On the big island of Hawaii.
Yeah. And Mauna or something.
Mauna
like
Loa,
that.
yeah. Well, that's on Maui, I think. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, there's another one there, but there was one right on Hawaii too. And so I got over it and looked down, and it was really a deep, big old hole. So I got slowed and put flaps down and started circling to see that I could circle inside the walls. So I could. So I just started easing down.
You were circling around in this.
Yeah.
You were in the volcano.
Inside the rim of the top of the volcano, and started just throttling back and slowing down, and keeping the circle and going down, started sinking in there just a little at a time, and watching the walls and enjoying the view. And then finally I guess it lasted probably not 2 or 3 minutes, and I got down in there a little bit, and all of a sudden started looking down a little bit and realizing what rough terrain was below me down there. And then I started looking up, and how high that wall, top of that wall was above me, and I decided I was in a place I didn't really want to be. I suddenly, just one of those things that suddenly get you, and you just feel the hair on the back of your neck rise up, and you get warm all over you, and say, boy, this isn't good. But I had to be real careful to not do anything sudden, and just put on a little power and get that thing climbing a little bit, and circle and circle. I must have circled altogether 20 minutes or so, going down and coming back.
Wow.
I finally cleared the top, going out and straightened down. I was, whew,
Man.
that was pretty stupid. What if that thing had missed down in there?
Yeah. If you'd had an engine out in there, they never would have found you.
Never would have even found me, let alone got me out. I'd have sunk in the volcano somewhere. that was a pretty bad thing to do, but
Yeah.
it just goes on my record as one of my foolish things. But it was an experience, I'll say that. Another thing that Volcano did for me one time, just froze me up, I'd say. I used to frequently, my friend and I, Ted Hansen, would get off some angle out over the water by that volcano there and get headed right to it and get going full throttle just as fast as we could go. And just clear the edge of the cliff going into the land and go right up the land. And the game was to go as far as we could right up the side of the volcano, because you can't get to the top. It's too steep at the top. You can't climb that fast to get an angle. So we just get going as fast as we could. And the game was to see who could go the furthest, just like a motorcycle climb. Who could go the furthest up the side before you had to give up and turn to get off. And one time was doing that, and got going up here and getting slower and slower. And I guess I could, like I said, frozen. I just mesmerized with it, with going up and the airspeed coming down very slowly. And I'm waiting for it to come down where I had to turn. And I just waited and waited, and all of a sudden I realized it was below where I was supposed to turn. And I eased around, going up the side of that hill, and ease around and get headed the other way and go down, because there wasn't anything. You can't go, once you get that slow, not much you can do, and you couldn't pull up at all. Couldn't even clear a tree if I had to. So I really got myself into a real tight place there. Ted had turned around already and gone back down. And he really laughed at me when I got back that day. He said, "You stayed too long, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure did. I won't do that again." I don't know how slow I got. Probably I got down to the 70s, I know.
What was Ted's last name?
Hansen.
Hansen, okay.
He stayed in the Navy. Actually, we both got out at the same time, but they gave everybody 6 months to change their mind and get back in if they wanted to. Most people wanted to go home and just forget it. That's what I did. And I didn't hear that about 6 months. I might have changed my mind later, but I didn't hear it, didn't know it anyhow. And just shortly after 6 months was up, I wrote to Malcolm Cagle, who was in Washington at that time, and said, "I believe I'd like to get back in." And he said, "No, can't take any more. They hadn't got any money anymore. No more pilots." And but Ted had known about it, and he got back in, joined up inside the 6 months, and stayed in the Navy. He ended up an admiral, and in charge of some carrier somewhere. It was quite a few years ago now. I guess in the 60s somewhere that I heard from him last. He lived down in Carmelita, California. He was a fine guy and a good friend. One of the things I didn't mention down at Vero Beach we used to do, climb around clouds. We also would get up along parallel to each other like flying formation, only instead of formation, we'd get wing to wing and try to bump our wings together. We broke a lot of landing lights in the wingtips that way, and the mechanics on the flight line would get back every day and say, "How in the world did you do that?" And they'd never say, "I don't know." Who would tell?
Wow, well, I would think because of turbulence off the wingtips, it would be pretty tricky.
It's pretty dangerous, but we managed. Ted's another good story in himself, if I can put him in here. Well, it involves me. Back in Westerly, we did some simulated gunnery runs on targets that they provided for us. At Block Island was one place, and we'd fly around and make a simulated attack on that. And Ted lead sometimes, and I'd lead sometimes. And one time we were doing that, and Ted got pretty well carried away with himself. I'm sure he just forgot what he was doing. And to simulate firing of guns, he started doing the stick like this, back and forth, made the tail go up and down. Of course, he didn't realize that. He was just doing this to say, "I'm firing the guns," you know. And my wing was up under his tail. That's how close I was at the time. And I didn't know he was going to do that. And he started doing that, and every time it'd come down, it'd hit my wing and knock my wing down. Well, if that wing goes down, then I'm turning this way with his turret, and I'm already awful tight. So it was just momentarily very dangerous. And so I stood that as long as I could. He kept hitting that. It just seemed like I can remember it a long time, but it was probably a couple of seconds, you know, doing like that a couple of times. And I just got so frightened I was going to run right into his side or his wing. And I jerked the stick just hard as I could this way. Jerked that wing up, and it bent his stabilizer and elevator. Turn it this way.
Yeah.
It bent it about halfway in, about like that. and didn't break anything, but the bend jammed the movement of the elevator. His elevator, he could not move his elevator after that. And he fortunately had been on the down cycle a little bit, and he had a little up in it, so he couldn't move it. And while he's thinking about this, it's beginning to come out of the dive a little bit and pull it up a little bit. And Ted was a very smart guy, and he figured out right away that the elevator tab is on the back of the elevator. Of course, not on the stabilizer. It's not a movable stabilizer like jets today, but the tab is back here. Therefore, if you want an up elevator, you have to put down tab. That aerodynamically pushes the elevator up and gives you nose up. But once the elevator is stuck, tab down would be nose down because the elevator could not move to go up with it. Whereas so he figured out right away, and he rolled his tab nose down, which put the tab up, and should have put the elevator down and nose down, but it didn't put the elevator down, so it was nose up.
It was like a mini elevator.
Yeah, it became an elevator, but he was controlling it not with a stick, but with a trim tab wheel on the F6. And
he was controlling pitch with a trim tab.
Yeah, and power. And as it turned out, after he'd flown a few minutes, he started using the flaps. Got slowed down and started using the flaps. Flaps are a nose down moment, and if he'd get a little too much up, he'd put down the little flaps and pull them back up and down and cycle them a little bit. He was working everything, and he kept it. I was just watching and staying right by him and listening to him on the radio, and he was working all that as best he could. And so we figured out he could keep it in the air, but what are we going to do about it? So we decided to go down to Groton. Where's Groton? Just up the coast from New York. I've forgotten the state it's in.
Connecticut, isn't it?
Maybe Groton, Connecticut. That sounds right. And because they had a 5,000-foot runway, and Westerly was just 2,500. So with no elevator control, but some nose-up capability, with a long runway seemed like a good idea. So we went down there and talked to them on the tower and told them emergency. They decided to let him land all right. And Ted backed off way off that thing and got it slowed down gradually, and just long until he could just hold the nose up. I don't remember how slow he got, but somewhere around 120, 130, he was still holding the nose up, and he kept the speed, put power on a little bit, and held that speed. And we did a wheel landing, which we don't normally do in F6s, but he could do it and didn't have any trouble. And he greased that thing on the end of that right on the end of that 5,000-foot runway, and rolled out nearly the whole thing. Didn't even use his brakes; he just let it roll because he was on the ground by then, with no elevator control. That was pretty good luck.
Yeah.
So that was an event I always remembered about Ted. He did
good thinking he didn't hit the brakes, because he might have gone over it.
Very calm. If he had just panicked a little bit, he never would have been able to do that. That's the background probably that prompted me in all my years of instruction in small airplanes to teach people how to land the airplane without elevator control, and how to use the trim tab and power and flaps to control pitch, and make them practice landing that way. Because that's one of the fears that generally pilots have about what if an elevator goes out, But there's a lot of things you can do if it's not an extreme attitude at the moment.
Right.
You can control pitch pretty good. I, in fact, had one, this is the way outside experience, when I was in Los Angeles. I flew on Catalina Airways, which had the G-21 Grummans, and I hired a guy that went to work for me there that was flying on that, and he had an experience in that Grumman one day going out to Catalina Island where the elevator horn on the elevator spar rusted through and broke.
Good.
And he absolutely had no elevator, and he was able to land that thing with power and flaps.
It wasn't fluttering?
Trim. No, it didn't flutter. It was just when the elevator horn break, it just streamlines whatever the tab setting is, you might say, just flies to that position. So the tab and the flaps and the power, all he had. Of course, he had plenty of water out there on that trip, and the ocean was smooth that day, so he didn't have any trouble with it. But he said he was pretty scared for a little bit.